We're going to be talking about the master class for the science of the noosphere, not only as an amazing experience for those who took it, which I reported upon this morning, but also an amazing scientific research program. And the fact that it could be both is just outstanding, and something that we could, I think, attempt to do in the future, to combine scientific research with real-world change efforts, both inner and outer. Part of all of this, part of the sort of updating of Teilhard de Chardin is called dual inheritance theory, which notes that in our species, basically, we have two streams of inheritance. We have the genetic stream, which all species have, but we also have this cultural stream of inheritance, which is based very largely on symbolic thought. So just to go through this little diagram, each one of you has a collection of genes. We call that your genotype. And those genes influence just about everything that could be measured in you. We call that your phenotype. Each of you also has a symbolic system inside your head. We call that your worldview, your meaning system, but let's also call it your symbotype to stress the comparison with genotype. And your symbotype also influences just about everything that could be measured in you, the very same phenotype. And so your symbotype and your genotype interact with each other during your lifetime, often through epigenetic mechanisms. How you think upregulates and downregulates many of your genes. And they have also been co-evolving with each other throughout our history as a species. And so I think that this is so very fascinating. If you look at any species and their genotype results not only in a single behavior, but a repertoire of behaviors. So every species, based on their genotype, has enough behavioral flexibility to respond to their environment. That gives them a behavioral repertoire. But to go beyond that repertoire, you need to actually change their genotype. Genetic evolution has to occur. The same is true for our symbotype. So whatever is inside your heads does result in a repertoire of behaviors that causes you to respond to your world in certain ways. But to go beyond that repertoire, you need to change your symbotype. And of course, you can do that within your lifetime. And so I think that this is actually a very powerful way, a deep way for me to make the point that in order to change how we act on the outside, we need to change the way we think on the inside. We need to work on inner and outer simultaneously and in very close conjunction with each other. Now, this has also been said many times in many different ways. So I wouldn't call it new, but I would call it a new explanation for thinking about it, and one which I think has a lot of metaphorical transfer, basically. So that's, I think, part of what's very interesting about dual inheritance theory. And what we can say about any symbotype, any worldview, any meaning system, I mean these broadly synonymously, is that we can evaluate them according to three criteria. Number one, what's inside your head? How does it motivate you? Does it get you out of bed in the morning brimming with purpose? That would be good. Second, what does it cause you to do? Does it motivate you to right action, this pro-social, in many different ways? Or does it cause you to do things which are basically causing harm to yourself or others? And number three, how well does it comport with scientific knowledge? So these are three criteria. And it's important to stress that of the three, the third one is the most dispensable. And based on trade-offs, the reason why so many worldviews throughout history are like the first story that Ben loves to refer to. In other words, chock full of departures from factual reality, is because those adaptive fictions, you might say, are so good at motivating us and causing us to act. And so most worldviews are, if they score high on 1 and 2, often they score poorly on 3. But with Teilhard, And I think increasingly in the modern times, we need to have worldviews that score high on all three. That's the trifecta. We want something that's highly motivating, causes us to do the right thing, and comports with modern knowledge. And so against that background, we can think of the master class as a form of symbotype evolution. Every member of the class that comes into the class with some current symbotype or their current worldview, and then this had the potential to change on the basis of the material and social interactions. And this morning, we had a panel of 5 people who took the class, and oh my golly, if you were there and it was recorded, just them speaking was so eloquent in terms of how important this class was to them and the wonderful thinking that they were able to do. So that happened. We don't have to, that happened by their own report. But as scientists, if we put on our science hat, can we actually measure this change? Can we scientifically measure symbotype evolution? So that was our ambition, and it was a collaboration between 2 organizations, Human Energy and my organization, Pro-Social World. And I do want to thank once again Ben for this wonderful symbiotic relationship that we have had between these two organizations. And so we had a research advisory team, which included some members of Human Energy, some members of Pro-Social World, and then some additional specialists from Missouri State University, Dana Polonius and Jordan Belisle. And Lauren, right here, who's about to speak, is their student. And these are crack scientists in something that you probably never heard of called relational frame theory and relational density theory, but it's a very interesting perspective on the evolution of symbolic thought. And Lauren will tell you a little bit more like that. So we had a very distinguished research team. And the research questions that we were asking, are there any changes in participants' worldview as a function of the master class? How are these changes reflected at the inner level of language and feelings? How are these changes reflected at the outer level of behavior? And what changes were observed in participants' external and internal behavior related to the experiences of connectedness throughout the course? These are the questions that we were trying to ask. And so now I'm going to pass this over to Lauren, and then I'll be back.
Hi everybody, I'm Lauren. I was the research teaching assistant on this class, and I'll tell you a little bit about the methods that we use to both create the class and then also conduct our research program around it. So we first started off by recruiting participants, and we did this through online outreach. Originally, we had expected to have about 100 people be a part of the class, and we weren't even sure if we would reach that 100 mark. And we were first requesting people to apply to be a part of the class, and we had several questions, including what are your interests in taking the class, and what is your background in cultural evolution, and also what is your background in the Noosphere. And we put this out to a few different through social media, through some social networks. And we were really surprised by how many people it reached. We had, I believe, 194 people apply to the class, and then about 180 people agreeing to participate. And
which social networks?
Oh, sorry, I just mean social media. I think Twitter and through newsletters, through Human Energy. Yeah. And interestingly, in the panel today, we heard about how some participants joined the class and how somebody they knew had heard about it and then passed along this information. So it really did go a far way. And because of all this interest, we decided to accept everybody into the class. Not everybody who applied ended up joining for various reasons, time commitments, things like that. And we did have this approved by an independent review board, so we had ethics approval before we began this process. So talk a little bit about the class. It may be a bit of overlap for people who were in the morning session. The class involved 10 weeks of material that were video conversations between David and various conversation partners. And these videos covered a really wide range of topics such as major evolutionary transitions, origins of life, cosmological evolution, Teilhard and the Noosphere, superorganisms, human origins, indigenous spheres, and so many more. And these are all also open access that you can find online on the Human Energy website or YouTube. And so these videos, there was 24 of them, totaling about 31 hours. This was kind of the bulk of content for the class. So the class was structured around, we covered a few of those topics each week. And the class was held for 10 weeks. We met twice weekly over this time span. We had a meeting on Tuesday, and these Tuesday sessions included a panel discussion with one of the conversation partners that were featured in that video that week. We also had small breakout meetings in this Tuesday session where participants would be randomly put into a breakout room with a couple other people to talk about the material after the conversation partners talked during the panel. And then after about 15 minutes, we'd come back and there would be a Q&A time. So participants in the class could interact with the panelists and vice versa. So our Tuesday class was very structured, and then our Thursday class was a little bit less structured. Each class ended up, was supposed to be 90 minutes and ended up going to 2 hours because there's just so much engagement. We couldn't get through everything in the 90 minutes. But our Thursday class was meant to be more just continued discussion with the members themselves. David instructed all of the classes. During the Thursday classes, we had a bit more time for breakout rooms where, again, people were randomly put into a breakout room and could continue discussion in the smaller setting. We had about 80 people regularly joining the Zoom sessions each week. And so could be large, so it was nice to have the smaller breakout rooms for more intimate discussion. Something else we did in these Thursday classes, a few of the sessions we held were unconference sessions where participants would pitch an idea beforehand on something they wanted to host a small breakout room for. And then during the meeting, people could join the breakout room based on the topic. And so these were smaller breakout sessions hosted by the members themselves for more focused conversation. And then we also had some brainstorming sessions in our Thursday classes. So one of something we wanted to brainstorm as a class was how might we replicate a class like this with like elementary, kindergarten to grade 12 type students. And so we were able to use the class just to brainstorm together since we had so many people who were interested in discussing it. So many great minds together. We also had a Hilo group page. So this is an online platform. And we created a page for the Science of the Noosphere class. Within this page, you could create smaller groups. So if you wanted a more focused group on a special topic, you could do so. This is kind of what the page looked like. So you can kind of pin things on the left and create discussion posts, create events, create projects all within this feed. And you can also view who the members are and put information about yourself on there as well. So this was kind of our asynchronous platform that we used for the class. We also created a collaborative Zoom room. So we had an open Zoom link that participants could schedule a meeting for. So if they wanted to meet with their a smaller group to talk about something outside of class sessions, we had something set up so that they could do so. We also had something called a mural board. And so this was just this kind of online space where you could use to brainstorm ideas and so on. This is just a little screenshot of a small section of the open mural board that a subgroup that we had, they're an economic subgroup, were using in their meetings. And then we also had an art gallery we had created before because there ended up being a lot of artists that were members of the class, and so they would share art and we would pin it to the art gallery so that folks could view it. We also wanted to create a research program around the class as well. And so I'll tell you about the methods of that. We started off in the very first week by getting informed consent from people who wanted to participate in research. So people could participate in the class without being a research participant. But if you consented to participate in research, you were provided with certain batteries before and after the class, and then also throughout as well. And so we had 6 different surveys that we administered at pretest. The first one was a measure of psychological flexibility. The second one was a social connectedness scale. The third one was looking at connection to nature. The fourth one, psychological well-being, a meaning in life questionnaire, and then also a scale on individualism and collectivism. And so we had about 100 participants consent to being a research participant. So not everybody did, but a lot did, which was great. A tool that we used in our methods is something called a multidimensional scaling procedure, which is an analytical tool that enables us to examine and interpret how participants perceive and relate to various stimuli, which allows us to capture an aspect of their symbotype, as David was mentioning before. So this method has been used in various fields before, like marketing and psychology, with the core objective of converting assessments of similarity between pairs of stimuli in a spatial model, which we call a geospace. I'll show you pictures later on what that looks like. So to gather the similarity data that we need for this analysis, participants were presented with various stimuli in pairwise combinations, and then were asked to rate their perceived similarity of those items on a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being least related and 10 being most related. And multidimensional scaling aims to represent this data within a reduced number of dimensions while preserving the relative proximities between each data point. So it can give us a visual representation of somebody's psychological underpinnings, kind of giving us a snapshot of what might be showing up psychologically for participants. And so in our study, we selected stimuli from a paper by Coltoco Riviera in 2004. And this paper highlighted just several worldviews, so several domains of worldview. So we started off with this paper, and then we had experts on our research advisory team who were familiar with the Noosphere pull certain domains that might pertain to the Noosphere and other class content. And then we adapted these into short statements. And we use those short statements as stimuli in this procedure. So some examples of the domains include complexity, consciousness, unity, and purpose of life. And then we shortened those into statements, which you can see here. These were all the different statements we had. So life is worthwhile, life is inevitably headed for deterioration, human nature is complex, human nature is simple, people conform to the group, and so on. Another thing we did, we had these kind of 3 anchors at the bottom here. So there's one stimulus says my worldview, the other one says society today, and this last one says society 100 years from today. And before we had participants, before they entered into this, before they did this procedure, reflect on what their worldview was, and then write a paragraph on what their worldview is. Also reflect on how they view society today, and also how they view society 100 years from today. And then these stimuli were then included in the procedure where they were presented with the pairwise combination. So for example, you might be presented with humans and non-human species are equally prioritized, and then also my worldview, and we're asked how related those 2 stimuli are to each other. And this was completed at pre-test and also post-test. So something we might expect to occur from something like this would be at post-test, hopefully after this class, you might see that stimulus, my worldview, clustering in this geometric space closer to stimuli that are more positive or more cooperative or so on. And I'll show you what this looks like in the results section, so you have an idea. Another tool that we used in our methods was called something called the process-based assessment tool. And this comes from a domain of contextual behavior science. And This area is more concerned with psychosocial processes of change that lead to relevant outcomes. So such processes include socialness, connection, motivation, and goal orientation. And this tool was originally developed for a clinical population, but we wanted to adapt this tool and make it more relevant to the masterclass. And so outcomes in the clinical setting would be things like anxiety, depression, and so on. But we were interested in outcomes such as how much do you feel that you're connected with other people? How much do you feel that you're connected with nature? How vital do you feel? How much distress do you feel? Do you feel that your life has meaning or no clear purpose? And how hopeful do you feel? So the first part of the assessment asked participants to rate each statement on a scale of 0 to 100. So these are the items here. And these are the kind of the process that these items are getting at. So for an example, one question was, I did not find an appropriate outlet for my emotions. And then another one is, I used my thinking in ways that help me live better. So participants were asked to rate each statement on a scale of 0 to 100. And then after they were asked all these questions, they were presented with these other questions and were also asked how much they agree with them. This was done every day for 8 weeks. So the participants who filled this out every day, you guys are really special people. We use an app called XBWall, and how it works is we can just load the survey in and then set up notifications that prompts participants every day to complete the survey. We had a brief window where the survey was implemented. So it would open up at 6 o'clock and then the participant had until the end of the day to complete it. And then the next day it started over. And we wanted to conduct this longitudinal data so that we could look at how those processes lead to certain outcomes across time. And this can be done by looking at doing something like an individual network analysis where you have certain processes that lead to an outcome. So in this hypothetical kind of picture, we have here this person is struggling to connect with the moment, which leads to no meaningful challenges, which impacts them finding important challenges. And having important challenges allows that person to experience a range of emotions, which leads them to feel less distressed. And so we wanted to do this, replicate this, but do this with those outcomes I had shown earlier. And then in recent research, there's something called a Gimme analysis, which identifies relationships present in an individual longitudinal network. And in an iterative fashion, it then seeks out pathways applicable at the subgroup and group level, but only retains them if they improve the fit at the individual level. And so we wanted to first do these kind of individual analyses for each person who participated for those 8 weeks, but then also to see if there was multiple participants who were had similar patterns in responding. And so this could help us identify clusters of individuals with similar inner behavior or processes that can then predict those interests of those outcomes of interest. Another thing we had each week are our participants. They did so much. Weekly reflections. And I can tell from reading these reflections, they were essays, really. So each week, participants were sent a link to complete a weekly reflection on class material. And then, so they were asked to complete a weekly reflection on class material or discussion from that week. And then if they submitted it by Friday afternoon, we were able to kind of compile everything and put it into a gallery so participants could view what other people were writing as well. The weekly reflections consisted of one written response, which asked people what their most significant insights from that week's material was. And then also we asked what their level of understanding was and the relevance of the material. And so, like I said before, this was made public to the group and displayed in the gallery. And so this is kind of an example of what that gallery looked like. You could kind of scroll through it and browse. You could find people's, if you're interested in, if you were, really engaged with somebody in like in their discussion, and you wanted to read the reflection, you could search for their name and read their reflection that week. And we also made sure people consented to being in this gallery, so if people could choose to keep their response private if they wanted to as well. Okay, so to get into the results, for people who weren't in the beginning, the earlier talk, I'll talk a little bit about our members. So like I said, 195 people applied to the class. 165 people ended up being onboarded and joined the high-low page. 100 individuals consented to research. And then we had about approximately 80 people joining live Zoom sessions each week. Anywhere from 60 to 80, it kind of depended if it was a Tuesday or Thursday session. We had more people attending the Tuesday sessions, which is when we had the conversation partners join. We also posted the videos on our asynchronous platform, so people who weren't able to make it to the live sessions, for example, we had people from different time zones, like people like across the world who weren't able to be make it to our meetings, able to watch the videos afterwards. Oh, and then we have this word cloud here. In the application, participants were asked to write down 10 I am statements about themselves. And so this generated this word cloud here. So we have people defining themselves as a student, as a husband, as a father, as passionate, as a mother, a scientist, a fan, a writer, a teacher, a researcher, an educator, a practitioner. And I think it really does show how diverse people's backgrounds were who came into the class.
And what they chose to say about themselves is
Yeah.
It's interesting, there's a lot more husbands than wives.
That was the case, wasn't it?
Yeah. Interestingly, Sage Gibbons, he is also a part of the research team, and he's done so much of this analysis. And he was telling me when he was kind of looking at making this word cloud, he found that there was kind of this dimension of masculinity and femininity showing up in the word cloud. And I think that also came up in so much of our discussion throughout the class as well, the differences and the similarities between masculine and feminine, and them not being, not having to be two separate things.
based on that basis, we invented on the spot a new little research project on what do you mean by the masculine and the feminine. We did a research project on that, which we won't discuss because it was just like a pop-up research project.
Yeah.
It's the kind of thing that we can do.
Yeah, we had 2 pop-up research kind of studies that we did throughout the class, and it was really great that 10 weeks we were able to do things like that.
Lauren, I just wanted to comment.
Yeah.
It also goes back to the conversation in the auditorium about the coming from here versus coming from here.
Right.
That really, right, we had a microcosm of that in our class.
Yeah.
Those of us coming from the right side of the brain or from the heart, and those coming from here.
Yeah.
And we know what the preponderance tends to be.
Those themes were definitely something that came up. A little bit more about the participants as displayed through their the psychometric batteries we did at the beginning. Just off the bat, we had a really, really positive and really strong group of people come in. And so here is the connectedness with nature scale. And so the red dots, the red line here shows the average score from the original study that the scale was developed by. And then it shows our participants' responses. And so our participants were scoring higher on the connectedness with nature scale.
Just to reiterate, these scales have been given enough so that we know from other studies what the baselines are. And so we could then look at our distribution basically against the background of other studies in the literature.
That's it.
Yeah. So we had clearly our sample feeling more connected with nature than probably the average. Same with psychological flexibility. So this measures kind of how adaptable you can be in the light of challenges and hardships.
The different colors represent.
That's green.
Oh yeah, sorry. That's pre-test and post-test. So the blue represents pre-test and the red represents post-test. In these scales, there haven't been any significant differences. So we see, I'll go back, sorry. With the connected with nature scale, we see maybe a slight increase at post-test, but nothing that's statistically significant. With psychological flexibility, we actually see a small decrease. That's funny, but again, not statistically significant. Psychological well-being, slight increase, not statistically significant. Meaning in life, a really slight decrease, but again, not statistically significant. Kind of, you can see here, the group is kind of on average with the original study. And then social connectedness is the interesting one. You can actually see at pre-test, participants were below that average score there. And at post-test, there was an increase, and it was a statistically significant increase. So at the end, I guess 10 weeks later, participants were scoring higher on that social connectedness scale, which is just, I think it makes sense given the fact that we had such a large community of people together. And just really speculative, I wonder if it's because maybe people feeling alone in their interests or working on things independently at their institution or in their personal life or at their work, and coming together and seeing all of these people who share your interests and so passionately, and interacting with them so often during the week and also asynchronously. We had 13 subgroups form. We had this in our earlier slides, but I just want to mention it because I feel like it's important. But we had 13 different subgroups form, and some of those groups met weekly to talk about more concentrated things as related to the Noosphere. So we had a subgroup on economics in the Noosphere. We had a subgroup on spirituality in the Noosphere. We had a subgroup on the evolution of music and evolutionary transitions. And so we had these specialized groups, and these groups were meeting additionally once a week. So spending so much time with people who share your interests might have played a role here.
And just a point that that was mentioned in the panel, just people chose to mention it. And the questions asked about social connectedness in general, not just in the context of the course. And so, and I think, again, when the panel members were speaking, it was I met all these people, and then I continued to interact with them. Yeah. So there really were connections which transcended the boundaries of the course.
Yeah. And, okay. So now moving into that, the results from that multidimensional scaling procedure. If you remember, we had people reflect on what their worldview was and what society 100 years from today might look like and how they view society today. And these are just kind of some snapshots of how people are responding. So for example, this left-hand one here, it says, my worldview is in line with that of Teilhard de Chardin. I believe that we are part of an emergent cosmo-theandric universe that is moving towards omega, total union in the cosmic Christ. And then we had another one here, science-oriented secular humanists with an awareness that there is much that we don't know, so it's good to keep an open mind. And people did write very long responses. There's just a really small snapshot of some people's responses that show that we had people coming in with maybe more of a spiritual worldview, and others with a very scientific worldview. For society today, we have some people who are more positive and some people who are a bit more pessimistic. On the left, we have this quote, society is infected by a number of toxic storage networks that are destroying the biological world. And then this one on the right, I'm actually quite positive. Many communities are functioning very well, many are not, but most are getting better. There are many problems, but our collective problem-solving capabilities have never been stronger. And then society 100 years from now, a bit more variant in their responses, but this one here says if society still exists 100 years from now, it'll be the result of cooperation towards the common good, which has come to be understood by all as desirable. The Noosphere will be coalescing and people will be aware of it. There will be shared consciousness around those things that are most essential to life and mutual respect for our cultural and religious differences. So I'm very kind of hopeful the world needs to be like this if it's going to be positive. And the one on the right, I hope that communities that make up society have become more self-aware and are organized more equitably. Our communities and the social societies made up by our communities, I have the potential to be vastly more supportive and enriching for their parts. And then to look at how this is displayed in that geospace I was telling you about, I'll orient you towards the graph a little bit. So the axes on the graph aren't directly as interpretable as they are in other types of graphs, such as bar charts or line graphs. They're abstract dimensions that have been derived statistically through that multidimensional scaling analysis to represent the distances or dissimilarities among the data points. So the axes in the MDS output don't usually have a meaning until you interpret the configuration of them. And so it's the interpretation is then based on the distances between the points in the space. And so the key to interpreting it is not the relative positioning of the points to each other, not necessarily their absolute position on the axes. So items that are closer together are more similar to items that are farther apart. And so at pretest, what we kind of see are four clusters of items collecting together. And so in cluster 1, the items that are in it include human nature is simple, life is inevitably headed for deterioration, human nature is competitive, people act independently. Here we have another cluster, human nature is disengaged, the individual is prioritized over the group, humans are prioritized over non-human species, and then we have that kind of anchor where people inserted their own view of society, kind of hanging out in this cluster here. Down here, people conform to the group, human nature is complex, people act in the context of group and individual needs, and life is worthwhile. And then on the right here, the group is prioritized over the individual, society 100 years from today, my worldview, and human and non-human species are equally prioritized. And so how we might interpret the dimensions might involve one dimension being more pessimistic or competitive views, while the other one might be signal more positivity or cooperation. And so the top here, we see more of that kind of those pessimistic items, and here on the bottom, more of those cooperative and more desirable items. And the horizontal dimension isn't necessarily as clear, but it does show distinct kind of clustering, so there is something. And so perhaps what might be happening between the sides could be function versus output. So here you have items like human nature is simple. So if human nature is simple, that could lead to humans being disengaged, the individual being prioritized over the group, humans being prioritized over non-human species. And then same with the bottom clusters. So people are conforming to the group, and people are acting in context of the group and individual needs, might result in the group being prioritized over the individual, and human and non-human species being equally prioritized. So note here, I would say when I look at this, what I'm kind of drawn to is where those anchor stimuli are. And so society today being in that more pessimistic cluster, and then my worldview and society 100 years from today being in that more positive, cooperative cluster. And I think that again just speaks to who our participants were in the class. People came in with a positive worldview, a hopeful worldview, and I think are hopeful about what society 100 years from today might look like. And then this stimulus right here, human nature is cooperative, doesn't really seem like it's too much a part of either of these clusters. It's just kind of on its own. And then when we look at the post-test, we still see those four clusters. The orientation of the clusters are changed, but again, you just want to pay attention to where the stimuli are, not where they are on the map if they're up or down. But we still have the positive up here and those more kind of negative items down here. And human nature is cooperative, moves slightly closer to items related to my worldview. But otherwise, I don't notice much change in between pretest and posttest. Things kind of remain relatively static. Besides that, measure of human nature being cooperative. But I think the takeaway from this analysis is, like I said, the story that it tells about our participants' worldview. They are participants who resonate with these following items: humans and non-human species being equally prioritized, human nature being cooperative, and the group being prioritized over the individual. And again, I just want to note that this is aggregated data. So this is all of the participants who did pre-test and post-test, but we could look at this at the individual level too. And so if we wanted to see what this might look like for a participant who maybe scored lower on some of the other psychometric items, we could separate them out and look at their own personal geospace to see where, for example, my worldview is showing up for them and how these items cluster differently. But this is just the aggregate version of the participants. Another thing I think would be really interesting would be to replicate this with a different group of people, maybe a group that isn't so, doesn't have already such high scores on like connectedness and collectivism, and see what this looks like for them. And then moving on to that process-based assessment tool measurement. We're just in the beginning phase of this analysis, so we don't have it completely ready yet. What we've been doing right now is just compiling all of the data and then looking at people and just on the items. We haven't done that like network analysis yet, but we are trying to get there. And what we would really like to do is give each participant their individual version of their network analysis, because they spent so much time, engaging in responding every single day, that we want to say, hey, by the way, these things make you feel most connected, or these things lead you to being more distressed. And so we're kind of on our way to getting to that point in the analysis. And then again, we want to see if we can find similar people who are behaving similarly. And then if we do find that there's people who are responding, who have similar patterns of behavior, we can then look at their language and their written reflections and see if there's also differences there. And then with that, I'll pass it on to David to talk more about some of the reflections.
So the centerpiece of this whole study is the language. I mean, we've been describing various surveys and assessment tools, but we have really a tsunami of natural language. We have the reflections. We could actually analyze the writing of Teilhard, the source material. Every Zoom conversation, we have the transcripts. And so the whole study of language from a natural language analysis, often with computerized methods, is an amazing field for us to actually see what happened over the course of these 10 weeks with respect to the clustering and what it all means. And I want to stress that this is only the very, very beginning. And we're open to collaboration. Our research team, we'd like to get more people involved, especially if you have expertise in natural language analysis. And so here we have a graph of basically the entire corpus of the reflections that basically map the adjacency of words. If we focus on something like cooperative here, then we can see the words that are most closely associated spatially, and then the colorization is just basically marking distance. If you asked me to interpret this, I would not know what to do. And I think this is very important, and I want to have appropriate humility about this, because language, after all, is best understood when it's spoken and listened to. That's where the most meaning gets conveyed. And when we try to analyze it through this method, there's a lot of signal that gets converted into noise. And so I think that we really have to think hard about that. When I myself view these graphs, because these graphs, you have to bear in mind, we've had a very short time to analyze this data between actually getting it and this conference. And so I myself have been staring at these graphs, trying to derive a meaning from them. And in my work as a scientist, I'm actually quite skeptical of such things as social network analysis and so on. They create very pretty pictures. And then you stare at the pictures, and because we're such meaning makers, we try to say, what does it mean? And so, it might not mean anything. And so I want to have appropriate humility as I lead you through these graphs. But here's just a standard word cloud of some of these our reflections. Of course, we have a very positive here: believe, think, find, seem, think, make, and so on. But these are for the. So what you can do with this huge corpus is you can lift out all the sentences that use the word noosphere, because noosphere is one of our key words. And so now you can just lift out all the sentences that use the word noosphere, and that's what these are. So these aren't just general word clouds. These are the words that surround the word noosphere, that are in the same sentence as the word noosphere. That's pretty cool. So I think that's something that's really you want to.
Very abstract. It's interesting.
Yeah, well, the noosphere is very abstract. So, and I'm much more interested in heterogeneity. So here most of these are aggregations, just basically everything has gone into it. But there's heterogeneity in the people. And I think for me, what's most interesting is actually to identify what I call species of thought. That if we have different worldviews, then that's like different species. And we don't want to lump them. I mean, no ecologist would be so silly as to lump deer and bear and trees in their analysis. So we really have to map the coherent islands of meaning, the species of thought, like good ecologists, and say, how many species of thought were in our class? And how did they evolve as species? That's a much more difficult thing than this kind of aggregation. So this problem of converting signal into noise is part of the challenges of this kind of analysis. So here we go again. And this is created by combining sentences. So basically, we're still working with the 600 odd sentences that include the word noosphere, but we're choosing another word to see how it relates to the noosphere. That's what we want to do. And we've chosen, in this case, the word conscious. Okay? And it turns out that conscious and noosphere of these 600 sentences was in 4 sentences. And so we've narrowed down the database to those 4 sentences, and we've made these connections. So we have, here's noosphere, there's our focal word, consciousness, and then we can see collective and always, and I don't know what it means. But isn't it cool anyways?
It's kind
What?
of the ideal scientific method. You found a tool that can strip out all the meaning, and then you can just impose it back again from your own mind.
Yeah, that's
turn it into noise and then call it a signal.
That's the way it is. So just like, I'm sorry that I brought you all here, folks. I'm kind of like the Wizard of Oz.
You're the man behind the curtains.
But just wait until we work on it a little bit more.
We won't recognize ourselves.
And so, but wait, there's more. We can do this again and again and again. And so to get ourselves to the Q&A here, I just want to do a turn back to words as spoken and as received. And so we have some weekly reflections here. Through the weeks of this master class, I've become more and more interested in unfolding my intuitive understanding of the noosphere and its implications, rather than, as I initially attempted to do, finding or grasping an unambiguous conceptual definition. That's really, I think, someone really becoming much more flexible. Isn't it fascinating how much it's just fascinating about language, isn't it? Of how much meaning there is in this sentence. And we need to, so the whole prospect of how we study this scientifically is something we have the material to do. We captured the material so that we can attempt to do that. And that to me is the big take home here, is that in addition to this amazing experience, subjectively, we actually did capture data at a very ambitious scale that's available for us to work on as long as we want and with as large a community as we want. And every time we organize an experience like this, we should be capturing that data. And so we can do it iteratively. That's amazing. That's a milestone. Just to set up the apparatus to do it before we even know the results. And so couple more. Will the Noosphere exist in 2100? In fact, it already exists in the internet, social media, and AI, as well as in telecommunications. But it is nothing like what Teilhard de Chardin was hoping for. For one thing, it is unevenly distributed. So is there some way we could basically talk about inequality or something, and then probe this huge database for attitudes about inequality would be one thing to do. I've had an experience of the Noosphere, thousands of experiences actually via poetry readings and composing. It is not a poetry that comes from the rhetorical mind, from which both examples of poems we had in the class came, in my view. One has to go outside of oneself to access the Noosphere, or at least to that part of oneself that is in the liminal space between me and not me. It is beyond belief systems. So now we're getting a glimpse of the belief systems, the symbotypes of individual people, which I think for the most part gets lost when you take the very coherent view of that person and you lump that with other people. You're converting signal into noise. And so how we do this is going to require quite a lot of finesse in order to how we do this. And so there's something you can scan if you want to get involved in future analysis. And I think we have a few minutes for Q&A.
Yeah, I think we have 15 minutes.
Great. So thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you so much. This is an incredible project. I have a question about the difference between what people report as their worldview and what their sort of governing worldview actually is.
That's a
I've noticed in myself that I can talk a really good game about being a Noosphere planetary being, but a lot of my actions seem to come from what I would call a different worldview. And I'm wondering, is that distinction significant for you, or do you have to just sort of accept self-reporting as close as we can get to, discovering what someone's actual worldview is? I guess the subtext is sort of, I can imagine a class where people report that their worldview has changed, but is that just what they think?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question, and of course we can't rely only on what they report. So how can we add to that? A lot of these methods come from the clinical psychology literature, and so basically they're based on therapists who work with their clients. And there, I think that among other things, you have a record of the person's behavior. And so there's a point. So the one thing, how are you behaving? And then how are you talking about it? And so I think there's a bit of triangulation that can take place there. There's also the kinds of things that you did with this, word associations, where you could actually get at how people respond to things. That's not quite the same as their own use of language. So I guess there's some triangulation. And a point I want to make is that in all of this data that we capture, including everything that takes place on Zoom, all the conversations and so on, then a lot of that is behavior. It's not their self-report, or words. It's their actual behavior, and and we could be measuring that. So it's a great point, and it's a point that I think that relates to all research. And so, thank you for raising the point. Yeah.
I'm curious if you captured the demographics of your sample and whether there were interesting correlations, say male, female, secular, religious, age, whatever metric you would look at there.
We have the data, and we have not analyzed it from in those terms. We really, truly just beginning, early days. But Lauren, do you have anything to say about?
Yeah, I can speak to like some of the demographic data we do have. I don't know the exact breakdown of it. We did have people from across the world, but mostly based in the United States and I think like Canada. Some people from Europe, and then I think some people in like, South Africa, and some people in Asia. So we did have some representation, but it was a very much a kind of westernized sample. I think the age range was, we had some kind of younger students, but a lot of it I think was like middle-aged or older. I don't know the exact breakdown of the gender, but
Probably about 65, I imagine.
yeah, I imagine something like that. But we do want to like explore that further.
I think that the biggest diversity was in the scientific, spiritual, artistic axis.
Yes.
There we had really artistically oriented people, spiritually oriented people, scientifically oriented people. And so despite the lack of diversity in some respects, I think that's a super interesting form of diversity to be looking at. And so I think that, did you want to say more about that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think part of it has to do with the word consciousness. And if you remember, the very first class I had asked you, are we going to get down into a definition? Because the words are so important that we have a common concept. So I know from my standpoint, coming from a spiritual background, consciousness means one thing to me. And so I'm coming in and I'm excited about the idea of science and consciousness, where somebody else comes in with a different background and might have a different view of what consciousness means. So I think that came out, don't you, David, in a class as far as what our backgrounds were and maybe what we came into it believing? I know that was true for me. And it certainly.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that that will be an analysis we haven't done yet. But take a key word like consciousness, or for me, spirituality is a key word because that has such positive affect for some people and negative aspect for
You may find two various species.
Species. So it should be possible to take a key word and do a cluster analysis and look at the clusters. And it's at that point, I think, that we're really getting at something. And then there's the whole longitudinal basis. And I do think, it's my impression from experiencing the class that there actually was a growing together, and at least some people. People became more comfortable with the science and the spirituality. Take the breathing exercise, for example. Some people are unaccustomed to that and what it represented. And then some people never got used to it. But I think others did. And like the whole thing about Teilhard is that he combines science and spirituality. And by the way, quite apart from the data that we gathered, let's do this kind of analysis on the corpus of writings of Teilhard to see how the master did it. And something that's amazing that AI can do, and I'm no expert on AI, I'm behind the curve there, but what I've heard and what I can imagine happening is that AI can imbibe the whole corpus of somebody, and you can have a conversation with that person.
Oh, wow.
You can talk with Teilhard. You can ask him questions, and then he will answer. Based on, isn't that amazing? And that would be a way of searching out data as opposed to the amazingly clunky way of doing it before.
The TR deepfake.
And you need to validate it, of course. So you can't just get spellbound by it. But I can imagine that it could be validated, and it would be, and if you wanted to do, you could say, Teilhard, tell me about this. And then if the AI could actually give you the sources, what went into my answering as a person was take you back to the text.
Yeah.
And then you can do the scholarly thing. But the thing about what I wanted to do is pick out passages of Teilhard's text that are so spiritual when you just look at it. A single sentence or a paragraph, and you look at it and say, what was it about this, these 30 words that were so uplifting? What was it that just, mwah?
Yeah.
And so it's at that kind of microscopic analysis that I think that you can there's going to be a wonderful set of activities that we want to be as inclusive as possible and engaging people in it. So I think it's just going to be a wonderful time, and it's going to lead to very important publications in how do we analyze worldview and worldview evolution.
If you scan the QR code and express that you're interested in further research, we'll send notifications as we continue throughout the process. And when there's opportunities for involvement, that's how you'll be notified. So if you're interested in being involved, just scan the QR code so we know who you are, so we have your name and email so we can reach out when the time comes.
But you'll naturally tell the class, right?
Yes, of course, of course.
Okay, of course.
Just a general question. As someone who has thought about all of this a great deal and very knowledgeable, do you see any difference in the human connections that are made in a Zoom session as opposed to everyone in person like we are today?
What I would say to that is that it's not as good, but it can still get awfully good.
Yeah.
That's what I would say. I'm surprised at how good it can get. On what would others say?
I would say I thought it got really good in our class, but I'm also participating in another study. There's only 14 of us. It's called Coherent Community. And oh my God, and it's all on Zoom. Within 2 hours, the way this is facilitated, I feel like I know these people. Like by the time of the second class, we're just connected. And so, yeah, when you're using the medium of Zoom, I don't know if it's a smaller class size, but the way it's being facilitated, we're all spilling our guts. And it's like, I know this person, like I love this person. And I mean, sincerely, we're all feeling it. I'm getting the chills even talking about it. We're all feeling it. And so even over this medium, there's a way to connect at such a deep level.
Well, there's the phenomenon of disclosing to the stranger that if you're in an airplane, you might spill your guts to the person next to you. Yeah. And the reason that you can do that is that there's no consequences. And there's a sense in which we do not disclose to those that we're actually in relationship with because of the complications of that. I think that's one reason why the Zoom meetings could be even.
So if you're 1,000 miles away, it's even more so.
Yeah.
Crazy stuff. Were the videos still on?
Yes.
All the time, everybody had their video.
Yeah.
Some people didn't have their video on at some points, but we did have, we didn't make people turn their video on, so some people would keep it off, but for the most part, people just naturally kept it on.
Emily and Ellen?
I think Ellen was before me.
I was just I completely agree with everything Marguerite just said, but there was something really special about knowing that this conference was coming and I was going to get to meet some of the people from the master class. So I think David kind of gave the pithy version of it. Like the Zoom was amazing and productive, and I was so happy to get to meet some people.
Yeah. That's true.
That's so sweet.
The fact that it was people of
Very good.
Were you gonna say?
Yes, it was.
I'm sorry.
I just defaulted to her because she was first. But no, it really was very effective. The Zoom was very effective. I came here feeling like I knew people already. Like I feel like I've known you for years. And that's because I had this course with you. And I mean, we just met for the first time in person yesterday.
Yeah.
But I felt like I knew her already, and same with Ellen and some others. So I mean, it was really amazing. And we kept our cameras on most of the time, except when we were eating. Because in my time zone, I was really hungry. You guys were going at it.
And it was the breakout rooms that was responsible for that, and also the subgroups. And so the people did have to. So meeting in small groups is a very important part of that. It wouldn't have worked at all if we had just been 80 people on Zoom, for sure.
No.
So, but isn't it nice to know that you could reach large numbers and you can still provide the small group experience? That's important because we need to reach large numbers. It's a constraint. Smaller is better in many respects, but we need to reach large numbers. And so I want to scaling up is an important, without losing the quality of the experience.
Just the fact that so many people who are deeply interested in a spiritual or religious view of the world, and so many people who are deeply interested in an evolutionary and biological view of the world were in the same space for 10 weeks. It was a unique experience. It was very, very interesting. And I do think that people really learned to not be so scared of the other guy's ideas in a way that was very, very profound. And I'm not sure if it'll come up in your data, but I think one of the big things that happened was a lot of people with spiritual background who kind of didn't really like science when they came in had changed their minds by the end. A lot of scientifically minded people who didn't really trust or like religious or spiritual people in this abstract way, when they met a bunch of them, really liked them.
That's what I want to see. That's what I want to see. And I think that's, for one thing, that's is a great point that can be framed as a hypothesis. So let's make that our hypothesis. And then let's go looking for it in the sense of finding out, there's our keyword, science, spirituality, look at the clustering, and then seeing it at the individual level, if we can, and so on. If we do get that kind of gravitation, and that's, to me,
something that we can really search for data.
Yeah, and so and that's probably the most important, the number one question to begin with, I think, would be that one.
I just want to be careful on that, though, because some of us came in there, including myself, with both from the get-go.
Sure.
Some of us, there is no problem.
Sure.
I have a master's in religion and ecology, so let's not forget that middle.
That species.
So that middle, hopefully that middle will appear as a cluster.
Right, that's what I think it would be.
That middle will appear in the data. And it might just be, in fact, it may well not be like bimodal. So it might look like a bell curve in which you would be in the middle of the bell curve. And then there would be on one end the ones that are more science and the other end more spiritual. And then you'd look at that. So
Taryn was the synthesis.
Right, he was the synthesis.
Yeah, so I don't like the either or thing.
Sure.
No, but just to your point, so I came in having a spirituality background, really not knowing science, but I was intrigued that science was lifting the veil and was discovering this one mind. But I think I've now pulled it together. So I think I'm closer to where you are, not that I have your background, but I think I have a more of appreciation for the science and how you're looking at things and how I look at things. So I can see, I have more of it's coalesced, I have greater understanding. So I definitely have moved.
Yeah, right.
Which I think is what we want more of, right?
Yeah, I just don't want to reify the problem.
Oh, absolutely.
If it's
Quite right.
not a problem.
another thing I want to look for is that what I find is that in this group, for example, and many others like them, the people are amazing. They're highly educated, they're literate, they're open-minded, they're imbibed so much, and they pretty well have complexity under their belt, at least in terms of the intuition and the vocabulary. But this specifically evolutionary body of information, and in particular multi-level selection and major evolutionary transition, is just something they have not encountered yet. They have not encountered it yet. And that's one of the things that was part of this is all about. How is that going to be reflected in the language? And there you might just look at word frequencies. I mean, so there's some things we haven't done yet, but frequencies of words going up. But there's something called LIWC, Linguistic Inquiry and Word Count, invented by Jamie Pennebaker, who's a health psychologist. You might have heard his name, which what it does is it's created a number of dictionaries that you can take a text sample, and the output will be like 80 different variables about such things as positive and negative affect, future versus past, orientation, and
I think,
what's that?
like I versus you language.
Oh yeah, singular versus plural nouns. And so it'll be very interesting to see what that kind of analysis reveals. And you can make your own dictionary. So we could make a multi-level selection dictionary, I suppose. You know, what are the words that are used here, and how much are people incorporating that into their intuition, and how are they thinking about it is something that we can do. So it's a playground, and it's or a sandbox, you might say. And I look forward not just doing it for this sample, but just imagine that we gather this kind of data every time we have a worldview change experience, that we gather this kind of data. That's like really becoming the everyday scientist. That's, you know, and then there's more. But wait, there's more. In terms of our group parameters, you know, and so anyhow, so that's, so thank you. It's so great to be here and to be having this be part of what we're doing.